God be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen and dined sumptuously every day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores. When Lazarus died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man died and was also buried. And from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames.' Abraham replied, 'My child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus likewise received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us there is a great chasm, to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours, or from your side to ours.' He said, 'Then I beg you, Father Abraham, send him to my parents' house, for I have 5 brothers and sisters, so that he may warn them, lest they too come to this place of torment.' But Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them.' But he said, 'Oh no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent.' Abraham said, 'If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.'" The Gospel of the Lord. So the other day at work, I come into the lobby and I find my colleague Robin standing near a man named Kevin. And both Robin and I have been assisting Kevin with a variety of things, bus passes, referrals, birth certificates. All of these things keep getting lost. So Robin has finished speaking to him to say, we can't keep helping you anymore. So I walk onto the scene. Kevin makes eye contact with me and very quickly turns his back to Robin and starts talking to me. He says, Mike. I said, "What's up, Kevin?" "That other lady who's helping me?" Robin says, "You know my name." Kevin doesn't even stop. He says, "The other lady, she won't be helping me anymore." Robin says, "I'm right here." Kevin says, "You know that lady? She's not very nice." Robin says, "You know I can hear you." But Kevin keeps on talking as if she's not there, and eventually she's like, "You know what, I'm out of here." So Robin and I debriefed about this a little later, and just talking about how frustrating it can be when we get ignored by somebody. And it reminds me of a quote I saw one time that says, "It would be too easy to say that I feel invisible. Instead, I feel painfully visible and entirely ignored." Now, I'm guessing all of us have had experiences of being ignored in one way or the other. Just the other day, one of my favorites happened to me. So I'm going on 490 to go to 390 North. Maybe you've traveled this way recently. You know there's a lot of construction. It's rush hour. All I'm trying to do is get into the left lane, right? I have no other options but to get into the left lane. And of course, the person who's in the left lane, they know I'm trying to get into the left lane, but they keep looking forward as if there's no one trying to get into the left lane. That stuff really bothers me. Another one of my favorites is I'll be out at like the supermarket or something, and there's someone I know, maybe not even that well, but somebody I know, we make eye contact, and they look away. It's at that moment I actually want to go up to them and say, "I know you saw me. Is it so hard to say hi?" And don't get me started about emails and texts that go unresponded to. Now, in today's gospel, we hear the story of Lazarus, who is painfully visible and entirely ignored by the rich man who passes him every single day. Martin Luther King Jr., in a great sermon on this passage, says that the rich man went to hell because he allowed Lazarus to become invisible, because he failed to use his wealth to bridge the gulf that separated him from his brother Lazarus. In fact, he did not even realize that Lazarus was his brother. When people are ignored and invisibilized, it can be very damaging. Everyone I know has some experience of being ignored, but some people and entire communities have lifetimes, years, and generations of it. We start living lives that get separated, and we have no idea of the struggles and circumstances, the joys and capacities of other people. In fact, we build walls and highways and gated communities to avoid engaging each other. And that way of life becomes patterned very quickly. And this is problematic for a lot of reasons. But at a fundamental level, we know that human beings are hardwired to connect with each other. We have neural networks whose only job is to create a sense of connection between and among people and to feel for them. And we're not only hardwired to connect, we are hardwired to share with each other. Now, there may be some parents and grandparents thinking, I actually don't think my kids are hardwired to share. But trust me, it's in there. It's innate. It's part of who we are. Humans evolved in social groups, and we knew we needed each other in order to survive. But sadly, some of these capacities can actually be reshaped and overridden by the messages that we get from the world around us. And I'm fascinated by this. There's a researcher named Susan Fiske who's shown that when test subjects are shown pictures of, for example, stereotypically homeless people, the part of the brain that is supposed to light up and feel a sense of connection is quiet. And the part of the brain that lights up when we feel some form of disgust or fear gets active. It's the same part of the brain that lights up when we see pictures of garbage. And so now, instead of wanting to connect, we want to get away from. Other studies have shown what happens to the brain as we get more wealth. The research has shown that, in general, the more money you have, the less you care about other people's feelings, the less you feel a sense of social connection, the more entitled you feel, the more likely you are to rationalize your advantage, and you are even less likely to stop for pedestrians in crosswalks. Now, Jesus could see this phenomenon happening thousands of years ago, and so he told this tale as a way to wake us up. He knew how quickly we can lose touch with the humanity of other people and how quickly we can other them, to feel little or nothing about their plight and to feel little to no connection to their life. He knew that it is very easy to look away. Now, you may have heard of the 60-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg, who was in New York City just last week. And she was talking to international leaders at the United Nations about the crisis we're in. And she echoed this sentiment of not looking away. She said, "We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you leaders can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away?" So you and I have inherited a world and a worldview that's conditioned us by its messages to look away. And in light of the enormity of some of the problems we face, it can be easy to tune out and to say, what can I do? I mean, what's the point? And often I turn to the work of the activist Joanna Macy, and she calls her work that reconnects. And her primary goal is to help us reconnect with our own selves and our emotional lives, to help us connect with other people around us, and to connect with the earth. And Joanna Macy says, yes, it looks bleak, but you are still alive now. You are alive with all the others in this present moment. So I just want you to turn to someone next to you and say, you are still alive. You are still alive. Now, sometimes at this point in the homily, some of you wonder actually if you are still alive, so that's actually a good reminder. And she goes on to say that even if the odds are stacked against us, which they are, we have to decide how we are going to live and do it with passionate engagement. So I want you to turn to somebody else and say, I want to live with passionate engagement. I want to live with passionate engagement. Yeah. So I'm just coming off a 2-day gathering this past week where more than 200 people from Rochester came together to reflect more deeply on racial equity. And one of our featured speakers was Dr. Ken Hardy. And we know that achieving racial equity in our society is no small task, right? A lot of us face the temptation as we're doing this work or any equity work to just look away from the harsh realities that we face and from the hard work that is in front of us. And he said part of the journey we need to take as we move towards racial healing is to develop a greater sensitivity for each other, but particularly for the people who have been historically left out of things. But he defines sensitivity this way. Sensitivity is when you think of someone else's perspective before they ask you to. Sensitivity is when you think of someone else's perspective before they ask you to. And so I've been thinking about this for a few days now, about what it would mean to develop greater sensitivity, to let the reality, the circumstances, and the humanity of the person who is in front of us really appear, to wonder, what are they going through? What's it like to live in the skin they are in? And to work to see the connections between their life and ours. And I imagine, what would happen if we practiced this more often? What if we just started in our own homes or with the people closest to us? What if we tried to think of their perspective before they asked us to? With our partner, with our kids, with our parents? What might start to change? What about with our coworkers or other people in our community? What if we tried to think of their perspective before they asked us to? What if we practiced this with strangers, with people we don't know, or even with people we don't like? What would happen if we more routinely thought of the perspective of people who have been left out, marginalized, or overlooked? How might our politics and our economics start to change? And just imagine what might have been different in the story today if the rich man had actually thought of Lazarus' perspective. When Greta Thunberg, who I mentioned, was in New York City last week, she cited a statistic that we have about 12 years left, she said, before we are not able to undo some of the mistakes we've made. She went on to say that she doesn't want people's admiration or praise. She said paradoxically, I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. You know, in the gospel today, the rich man got very interested in equity work just at the wrong time. His house was on fire his entire life, and he never even smelled the smoke. Or if he did, he just ignored it. And back then and now, we know that issues of climate crisis are rooted in social inequality, and that social inequality fuels the climate crisis. So if you try to address one, you will have to address both. And the reality is that we are living in a time when a lot is going to be required of us. I saw a little post on Facebook the other day where at a bookstore there was a sign in the window that said, the post-apocalyptic fiction section has been moved to current affairs. These are strange times, and unfortunately, many of the problems that we are facing now have been substantively ignored for a long time. And it falls on us to rediscover our capacities to recognize everyone as kinfolk and to share in ways that may be unfamiliar or unprecedented. Turning this thing around will require us to experience pain and not look away, to experience outrage and tears and to not check out. When I was young, I got to see reruns of comedian Jack Benny. Some of you may remember Jack Benny. And in one of his comedy sketches, he would play a character who was very attached to money. And in the routine, a robber would come up and say to Jack Benny, "Your money or your life?" And Jack would be there going. The robber would get impatient and say, "I said your money or your life?" And Jack Benny would say, come on, I'm thinking it over." And in today's world, I think we're faced with the same question. Money or life? It's absurd, but we as a culture actually seem to be thinking this one over. And we've been warned for more than 2,000 years about the dangers of choosing money. I really hope we can make the right decision while there's time.
And if living life were easy, how would we find the strength and pride within us to bring some peace of mind? Yeah. And through the ages, life goes on. Never-ending rights, never-ending wrongs. If we could just build our children's hope for tomorrow, it's all I pray. Open book for tomorrow, empty page to draw. Pictures of the future, of the dreams you never saw. And the bold with brilliant colors that bring the page to life. If your heart's within the bindings, it's easy to survive. Through the ages, life goes on. Never-ending rights, never-ending wrongs. If we could just build our children's hope for tomorrow, it's all I pray. It's all I pray. Life goes on, never-ending rights, never-ending wrongs. If we could just build our children's hope for tomorrow, it's all I pray. It's all I pray. Yes, it's all I pray. It's all we need. All I pray, all I pray. Oh, we really need, oh, we really need, all I pray, all we need, all I pray, all I pray. And it's all